A bank can't foreclose if they can't produce the papers, right? Remember Congresswoman Marcy Schechter standing up on the floor of the House telling us that people could stay if the banks couldn't produce the papers? Well, it turns out the banks have found as many shady ways to foreclose as they found ways to lend. And scarcely 2 weeks after the country's fourth biggest lender, GMAC Mortgage, revealed that it was suspending all foreclosures in 23 states for suspicion of fraud, we're looking at a nationwide scandal. This week, legislators called for a federal investigation of, among others, J.P. Chase, Bank of America, and GMAC. In a minute, we'll go to GRITtv commentator Danny Schechter, producer-director of Plunder, and author of The Crime of Our Time. But first, here's one man's story as told on Good Morning America.
I was paying all the time until 2007. I had some health problems.
Fernandez is one of tens of thousands of Americans caught in paperwork hell when the company that bought the mortgage on his Orlando, Florida home kicked him out. He had missed 3 payments after suffering a heart attack. The loan officer that signed the paperwork, a so-called robo-signer, admitted he authorized more than 10,000 foreclosure documents a month without reading them.
There's something very, very sneaky behind all this.
Very, very sneaky? Is that the word for it, Danny?
Indeed it is. And now we have the Attorney General agreeing to do an investigation of all of this. Finally, one of these fraud issues seems to have developed, a national profile, and it's breaking out in all media outlets as they look carefully at how these foreclosures have been executed and how illegal many of them are.
So what do you think's lacking from that ABC report on Good Morning America?
Well, the problem is that the foreclosure fraud at the back end is only one piece of what's a chain, I would say, of crime here. It starts with the mortgages themselves, people filling out forms, often making errors on the forms, often not being given full information, taking on loans that they can't really afford. There's a premeditation to all of this.
So that's at the selling end. And then at this end, the foreclosure end, we're hearing about robo-signers on these foreclosure forms.
Well, this was all to try to simplify things for the banks. And, of course, it did for a long time until somebody pointed out that actually judges have to review these foreclosures, and they can't do it if these things have been robo-signed by people who never even looked at the underlying paperwork. So we have a situation of people really having their homes stolen out from under them illegally, improperly, and in many cases, the courts have gone along with it. It's sort of a kangaroo court situation.
So what can happen to somebody like Luis that we just saw in that report?
Well, he has to get a good lawyer, and this is the problem. There's a lot of class action suits now being filed, but the U.S. government really has to step in and take this out of the realm of the individual being wronged and look at a whole class of people who have been wronged. We're talking about millions of Americans who have experienced this and who have gotten no relief from the courts, no relief from the legislature, no relief from the administration, and they desperately need it.
And could we get some of those cases if there is an investigation of all these banks? If we're talking the top 4 leading banks, 23 states, shouldn't somebody end up in jail?
Somebody should be in jail, but not if you just prosecute individual cases. What we need is a RICO-style prosecution where the real estate people, the insurance people, and the finance people who work together in what's really a criminal enterprise are basically held accountable, and that hasn't happened.
There's one other piece of this. If the banks are kind of fudging who owns what and when, what does that mean about their own stated assets and all these bonuses these bankers have been getting on the basis that their banks have been, quote-unquote, recovering?
Well, the banks have basically been fudging this for a long time. And, you've heard a lot of references to toxic mortgages, toxic assets. What does that mean? It means there are no assets behind the assets. It's worthless. But yet we've preserved the fiction, and now they're saying, well, if in fact this crisis, this scandal actually erupts, 2 things could happen. 1, foreclosures could be stopped. 2, banks could actually go down, and we might need another TARP, according to the Washington Post, to try to pump more money into the banks. So it's a no-win for American citizens.
I can hardly wait. There's this story out of Tennessee, got everyone's attention this week. Take a quick look.
A house goes up in flames and firefighters don't respond despite the homeowner's plea for help.
I hadn't paid my $75 and And that's what they want, $75, and they don't care how much they burn down.
Why is this story getting so much attention? I mean, it's a juicy one for sure, but it clearly resonates way beyond Tennessee.
Well, you know, this is a situation where public agencies now want fees for services. If you, have an accident in New York and the ambulance shows up, you will get a bill from that ambulance later on, or the fire department, or any city services. They're trying to get you to pay for their services. So the idea that, there are public services is going out the window. It's being privatized, except you're the privates that are actually going to be paying for it. And this guy, hadn't paid his $75, and the fire department came, checked the computer base, database, found his name was not among those who had paid, and they just stood by.
Yeah, and of course the people like Glenn Beck, who was saying, well, it's not a matter of compassion, it's a matter of those $75. No fire department's going to fail to put out the flames around his house.
Well, this is the reality of it, is that the poor people, working people, are the people who are suffering the most. Minorities are suffering the most. And the banks are not only making a fortune off of all of this, but many corporations are stashing away tons of money and not creating jobs with it, but instead buying back their stock.
Yeah, this was a big story this week, Danny. I mean, as we're talking, I just have read that report where you've got PepsiCo, HP, the Washington Post board deciding, instead of hiring people or buying new stuff, to buy back their own shares, and it works. They go up in the stock market.
They go up in the stock market, and guess who makes money from that? The people who own the most shares, usually the insiders and the big investors. So, the idea is to sort of pump up your share price. In the meantime, you're not doing anything for the larger economy, and they're able to get away with this. And this is, once again, property rights, Trump's human rights.
Where is the basic truth-telling? I mean, just quickly, here's John Boehner talking about what's holding back the economy. He isn't mentioning companies stashing cash. Take a look.
Listen, Sean, I've got two brothers that are unemployed. I've got two brother-in-laws that are unemployed. I understand what's going on out in America, and I used to be a small employer. And with all of the uncertainty that's out there coming from this administration and this Congress and the policies they're advocating, every employer in America is scared to death. They're locked down. And until the uncertainty begins to clear, you're not going to see the economy improve. And one of those big uncertain activities is taxes.
It's not going to happen on Fox, but is it ever going to happen where someone says it's the hoarding of cash, buddy, that's holding back this economy?
I mean, all of this is so vague. It's the uncertainty, principle. I mean, you can just talk around these things, and how do you know they're lying? Because their mouths are moving. Okay, that's the unfortunate reality here. I mean, they all have message points. They just pump those message points, whether or not there are any facts behind them, whether or not there's any reality that they describe. And this is where we are right now, this partisan, pissing contest, really, that's going on. And most Americans are sick of it, and they're tuned out to it. And the Congress has the lowest approval rating, even lower than, the president or the parties or what have you.
Danny Schechter, you can get his DVD Plunder through our website, and much more information there besides. That's GRITtv.org. Danny, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Laura.